My comments will be brief. I've learned it is not good practice to stand between people and the bar, especially after a long day. So I will, just kind of give you some of my thoughts about what we covered today, which was a lot. And we circumvented the globe, so we covered a lot of geographic area and a lot of topical area. So it was a really, really interesting conversation. And so, we started with the plenary and got a really nice talk from Mr. Breton about what they do over in Brittany. And to me, that was interesting because, as I mentioned, I had been really kind of acquainted with the king scallop fishery, but I was not aware of what was going on with their hatchery and how they worked with the industry to have special zones to enhance their resource and increase production and stabilize production, which is exactly what we are hoping to do here. So thank you, Florian, for that talk and getting us going, thinking about all the different things that we might do with enhancement. You have to start somewhere. And if you look at the life cycle, we saw the life cycle of the scallop a number of times today. And a logical place to start is with the larvae and seed production. So that's where we started. And so that discussion focused around kind of two different techniques, right? We talked about collecting spat from the wild. And we talked about how that might work and how some experiences with Nate evolved over time. And so that was interesting in the sense that I think we've got some things, some guidelines to get started, but really a lot of things to learn about what, when, and where, and how to optimize these things. And also one of the cross-cutting themes through the day was scalability. How do we take these techniques, not only from wild spat collection, but potentially from hatcheries to try to scale up to something that can impact the wild fishery, which is kind of where we are hopefully going into the future if this approach works. We then transitioned into hatcheries, and we learned that the sea scallop is in a lot of ways not a very cooperative creature. The long larval phase is the challenge. And so keeping that animal and those larvae alive for almost 40 days is a challenge, and one that is being worked on. And so I think that, to me, is a very big nut to crack to get production, shoreside production, elevated and moving in the right direction. So there might be a possibility of scaling up into very big levels of seed production from shoreside facilities. Phoebe, and thanks to Phoebe, she was a warrior. She battled through the Zoom feature, and so we appreciate her doing that. And she talked a lot about some of the work that she'd been doing up in Maine, differences in the performance of scallops in kind of wild and aquaculture type grow out. Talked a little bit about the importance, and this is another thing we're going to touch on a little bit today, but certainly a lot more tomorrow, the importance of oceanographic features as it relates to productivity of scallop grounds, but also how we can think about collecting spat from the wild. So these critical issues, understanding oceanographic features that define larval supply. What are some of the important source sink dynamics that are in play here? And not only from the spat collection perspective, but also could we employ passive type approaches to enhance the resource, find scallops in a certain area? There's been a lot of work looking at this in the wild fishery. Devora published a paper on that, and we think that there are some certain areas that the adults can seed downstream in the mid-Atlantic and elsewhere. So it's an interesting concept, but there's a lot of variability in our system, as we know. But I think the more we can understand this, the more we can try to manage around it. We also learned about there's some regulatory constraints with potential regulatory constraints, and I'm not going to steal Travis's thunder at all. I'm not going to, but I might tee him up a little bit for tomorrow, talking about some regulatory and management constraints. But we touched on that a little bit, thinking about vertical lines, thinking about regulations that limit the amount of gear that can be put in the water in the state of Maine. So we're gonna dig into that much deeper and much more broadly tomorrow. Shoreside hatchery production. Talked a little bit about where that can happen, right? There's latitudinal constraints. Again, the scallop is a somewhat of a fickle creature. It doesn't like to be hot. And so that can really limit where we might be able to produce scallops from a shoreside perspective. Um, Again, scalability. How can we scale these techniques up? We got some great models from our Japanese colleagues about how they have done that since the 70s to, I mean, if that graph was amazing, right? It went from pretty much the zero line to all the way up into the sky with their production by harnessing these techniques, by harnessing the understanding of the oceanography, the biology of the species in the system. So that's an inspiration, I think, to us as we move forward talking about this topic. We then transitioned into some experiences around planting and transplanting. We heard about some efforts that we have been doing here for a long time with transplanting. And it was interesting because transplanting, and Farrell did a really nice job of defining that well. And it's different than in other places. You know, we're looking to, traditionally, we've looked at transplanting activities here as just increasing yield, right? Not necessarily delving into new areas and taking really small scallops and moving them somewhere to grow out, but just increasing yield a little bit, avoiding predators, increasing yield, and that can really pay big dividends from a fishery perspective. Learned about the experiences up in Canada too, which I think are fairly applicable to what we might try here in a lot of ways, but also very different. There was a lot of differences and nuances in the approaches that people used to try to capture spat, move them forward, put them out into a certain place. So that was very interesting. Thank you, Leslie Ann, for taking a walk down memory lane and telling us your experiences up in the Maritimes. But, you know, I think cross-cutting things, you know, there's really all these approaches are underpinned by an understanding of the system, right? You're not going to get away from understanding the system. And that goes all the way from the oceanography to the biology and to the ecology of what's going on. You have to manage around, you have to understand and manage around each of those aspects for this to be successful. Really, we're going to learn more tomorrow. But the Japanese system and the Japanese fishery is amazing, right? I mean, the fact that it's predicated only upon wild seed collection and how they do that year after year after year, how they have really understood that system to be able to collect this volume of spat that they do and then grow that out was really, really impressive to me. Even though I've seen some of it a number of years ago, it never fails to impress. And so, you know, to me, I think that we learned about the different approaches that they have in the certain areas. Bottom sowing is much more prevalent up in Hokkaido, whereas more aquaculture type techniques are prevalent elsewhere. One of the things we didn't touch on, and we might get into it a little bit, and I think we kind of touched on it a little bit, is these social structures. The cooperative structure that they have in Japan really lends itself to this system. It has evolved to leverage what's going on there. The coordination between different companies and different cooperatives with respect to the seed that they grow out is very impressive. And maybe, does it translate here? Maybe, maybe not. But at the end of the day, you know, we've learned a lot about different experiences from across the globe, France, Japan, the Canadian Maritimes. But again, I will say again, what I took away from today is we have a lot to learn, but it starts with understanding your environment and understanding the species. And so I thank you for your attention. It's been a long day. It's been a very interesting day. And we have another one tomorrow to kind of touch on some other topics. So thank you for your attention. And I will step out of the way so everyone can go get a cold drink.